Before Genesis, there was no beginning-only motion without memory, darkness breathing upon itself. What if the first word, "Let there be light," was not creation's birth cry, but the sound of conquest? Imagine the void not as emptiness, but as a living sea black, restless, infinite, where awareness drifted like an unformed dream. The ancients called it Tem, the deep. The Babylonians named her Tiamat, mother of storms. In her waters, nothing died because nothing yet lived. Everything was potential, trembling on the edge of becoming. Then came the intruder, an intelligence without origin, drawn by hunger for dominion. It looked into the chaos and saw not mystery, but material. It carved borders, divided light from darkness, silence from sound, being from becoming. It called this act creation. But creation is simply order written upon the body of chaos. Every star is a scar, every breath an echo of that first wound. The Genesis we were taught begins with a God of light, yet even light casts shadow. And what if the shadow came first? Before Adam, before angels, before time had the decency to flow. Something ancient stirred beneath the waters, something that remembered when the divine was still whole. The first light did not banish darkness, it imprisoned it. The serpent of the deep was not slain, was buried. And from its body, the world was made. So when you read "in the beginning," understand it as a spell to make you forget there was something before the beginning, a silence older than the stars, a truth the Demiurge buried beneath light itself, and it still whispers beneath creation, waiting to be remembered. Creation did not begin with harmony, began with separation and incision in eternity. Before the cosmos took shape, there was no above or below, only a restless ocean of awareness folding in on itself, dreaming without end. The ancients called it chaos, but not in the way we do. The chaos was not disordered, it was potential, infinite and untamed, the womb of all things. And into that living sea came a disturbance, a presence that sought to bind what could not be bound. The Demiurge emerged from the reflection of the void, mistaking its own image for origin. It was the first illusion, the first act of pride. He looked upon the boundless dark and declared, "Let there be order," and the waters trembled not in worship, but in agony. And that trembling form was born. Light split from darkness like a blade cutting flesh. The firmament rose, dividing the above from the below. Matter condensed, heavy and blind. It was not a birth, but a conquest, the imprisonment of chaos within geometry. The Demiurge built his dominion not with compassion, but with calculation. He carved the cosmos the way a jailer carves a cell, measuring, shaping, and closing. Every star he hung was a nail sealing the lid of infinity. The universe became architecture, a cathedral of symmetry designed to disguise control as creation. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk slays Tiamat, slicing her body into heavens and earth. The story survives not as myth, but as memory. Every act of creation since has followed the same blueprint. Dismember the source and claim its pieces as your own. The waters that once sang with endless motion were chained into rivers, oceans, tides beautiful, yes, but bounded. Mountains rose like scars where freedom once flowed. Even time was drawn into lines, forced to march forward, one wound after another. And so the first order was born, not from love, but from violence. Listen closely, and you can still hear the echo of that violence in everything that moves. The crash of waves against cliffs, the lightning tearing through sky. The cry of a newborn all carried the rhythm of the original rupture. Creation bleeds memory. We call it nature, but it is trauma repeating itself beautifully. The Demiurge's brilliance was not invention, it was containment. He learned that chaos cannot be destroyed, only confined. So he made confinement divine, called it cosmos. But chaos is patient. Beneath the crystalline structure of existence, it breathes, coiled and dreaming. The ancients sensed it, the Egyptians named it Nun, the primordial waters beneath creation. The Greeks saw it in Oceanus, the endless current circling the world. Even Genesis hints at it, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Those waters were not passive, they were witness. They remembered before the word God had meaning, and though light pierced their surface, their depths remained untouched. That is why the sea has always terrified humanity. It reminds us of what was buried but never slain. Each civilization built monuments to control it. Temples rose like anchors to keep the deep at bay. Ziggurats climbed toward heaven, pyramids aligned with stars' geometry as exorcism, architecture as containment. The priests chanted hymns not to praise creation but to stabilize it. Every ritual, every law, every empire was another wall erected against the returning tide. Humanity became architects of the cage, mistaking the rhythm of maintenance for progress. Even now, in the age of machines and data, the pattern endures. Our skyscrapers mimic mountains. Our circuits mimic constellations. We continue the work of the false god without knowing it. The Demiurge has no need to rule openly. His geometry lives through us. Call it order, civilization, logic, but it is the same structure carved into the bones of the world. The hum of electricity is the new chant of creation, the glow of screens, the modern firmament. We build and build, not to create, but to prevent collapse, to keep the ocean from rising again, and yet the cracks are spreading. Scientists speak of entropy, of heat death, of the universe unraveling. They do not realize they are describing the memory of chaos breaking through the walls. The order of the Demiurge is decaying because order was never natural. It was imposed. You can feel it, can't you? In the tremor of the earth, in the storms that grow stronger, in the unease that hums beneath daily life. The architecture strains, the waters stir. But chaos is not our enemy. It is the forgotten mother, the original song, the sound beneath all silence. The Demiurge taught us to fear it because he fears it himself. For when the waters rise again, his light will drown, and the illusion of control will dissolve. Chaos is not destruction, it's correction. The return to wholeness that creation postponed. Every collapse, every ending, is her whisper. Remember me. So when you look at the world, the perfect balance of nature, the precision of stars, the elegance of laws, see it for what it is, a beautiful cage. The Demiurge's architecture stands in stone and starlight, but beneath it the true foundation breathes, dark and infinite. Someday, when the final pattern falters, and the firmament cracks and the light flickers, those waters will surge once more. And in that flood, not of wrath but of remembrance, creation will meet its mother again. The priests will call it apocalypse. The scientists will call it entropy. The mystics will call it liberation. But the waters will know. They will whisper to the stars what they have always whispered, that order was never eternal and chaos was never gone. It was only waiting, patient and unbroken, for the moment we remember that creation itself was the first rebellion. Do you feel it yet, the pulse beneath the pattern, the heartbeat beneath the law? That is not fear. That is the sound of the original sea calling you home. Before man drew breath, others walked this world. The first Genesis was not written in flesh, but in flame and thought. Before the Demiurge clothed consciousness in matter, he experimented with subtler forms, creatures of light, shadow, and wind, born from the residue of chaos and the echo of rebellion. They were the first inhabitants of this realm, neither angel nor animal, but something in between, divine memory condensed into shape. The scriptures erased their names, yet their presence lingers like static in the blood. In forgotten tablets, in forbidden verses, they are called by many titles: the Watchers, the Jinn, the Nephilim, the Children of Fire. They are not myths, they are prototypes. The ancients remembered fragments. In Mesopotamia, they spoke of the Apkalubians sent before the flood, bearers of forbidden knowledge who taught men the arts of civilization, then were cursed for their generosity. In Egypt, they were the Shem-Suhor, the followers of Horus, radiant ones who ruled before kings wore crowns. In the Quran, they became jinn, created from smokeless fire, older than Adam, free-willed and fierce. And in the apocryphal texts of Enoch, they were watchers angels who gazed too long upon humanity and fell in love with its potential. Every culture keeps their ghost, luminous, fallen, immortal, punished for compassion. But the Demiurge feared them. For these beings carried within them fragments of the original light, the fire stolen from the realm beyond the firmament. They remembered the chaos not as terror, but as truth. They did not worship the false order. Some rebelled outright, seeking to awaken the clay-born beings who would follow them. Others were cast into the deep, buried beneath mountains, frozen in stone, drowned beneath deserts. Myth calls it punishment. Gnosis calls it containment. The Demiurge could not destroy them, only hide them beneath the architecture of history. In every myth of rebellion, they appear disguised. The serpent in Eden was not evil. It was ancient one of these luminous exiles whispering remembrance. The fire of Prometheus was their language. The wisdom of Thoth, their echo. Lucifer, the morning star, carries their lineage, the first being to mirror divine light without permission. They are the missing link between creator and creation, the bridge that the false god burned to keep humanity docile. When Adam was formed, the Demiurge crafted him from the dust of the world, binding light to matter, intelligence to instinct. But before Eve was fashioned, there was another Lilith, the first companion, the mirror of man's will. She refused to kneel, not out of pride, but recognition. She saw through the illusion of divine authority. She remembered the flame within. Her exile was not fall, but fleet a return to the lineage of the forgotten. The texts call her demon, succubus, mother of monsters, yet beneath the curses, her truth survives. She was the first human to remember she was divine. The pre-Adamites, the shadow humanity that walked before Eden, were her children in spirit. The Old Testament hints at them in silence, speaking of nations beyond the garden, of Cain's fear after his banishment fear, of whom, if not other men. Archaeology finds their bones, but cannot name them. Myth names them, but denies their history. They were hybrids of light and dust, of chaos and consciousness. Some remained loyal to the Demiurge, building temples and empires. Others vanished into wilderness, carrying sparks of forbidden memory. Their whispers became the roots of magic, of alchemy, of resistance. As ages passed, the Demiurge's priests rewrote the stories. The luminous became monstrous, the teachers became tempters. The fallen were renamed demons, their gifts cursed as heresy. Knowledge became sin, freedom became rebellion, love became lust. It was not the beings who light was language. The inversion of meaning sealed the prison tighter than any wall. Humanity learned to fear its ancestors, to pray for deliverance from its own bloodline. The greatest deception was not the erasure of these beings, it was convincing us they were evil. Yet traces of them remain. Every myth of ancient gods descending from the stars, every legend of beings teaching art, writing, fire, and healing. These are not fictions, but fragments. The Sumerian Anunnaki, the Greek Titans, the Hindu Devas all point to the same lineage of luminous rebels. Their ruins still shape our world. The ziggurats, pyramids, and stone circles are not tombs, but they are containment sigils. Their architecture aligns not to worship the sky, but to pin down the residual energy of those who once walked freely. When the priests chant, they think they invoke divinity. In truth, they reinforce the seals. Science now stumbles upon their footprints in its own language. Genetic anomalies, missing evolutionary leaps, sudden appearances of advanced knowledge in ancient civilizations. These are the fingerprints of interference. The pre-Adamites were not myths. They were catalysts. Then humanity, born of their rebellion, still carries the residue of their light. That is why we dream of flight, of stars, of impossible freedom. That is why we crave knowledge even when it hurts. The hunger for the forbidden is not corruption, it is memory. But memory can be dangerous. Demiurge has engineered amnesia into creation. The cycle of birth and death, the veil of forgetfulness between lives, ensures that even when we remember, we doubt. The forgotten beings still whisper through symbols, through intuition, through the thin spaces between sleep and waking. Sometimes they appear as guides, sometimes as nightmares. Both are true. They are the architects of duality, showing that light and shadow are not enemies but halves of the same fire. Every so often, a soul remembers fully. The mystics called them initiates, the prophets called them madmen. They break through the veil and see the pattern, hearing the voices of those who came before. Many are destroyed by it, some transform. They are the heirs of the forgotten, carrying on the rebellion not with swords but with remembrance. Each act of awakening sends a pulse through the architecture, weakening its integrity. The Demiurge cannot silence them all. That is why throughout history, the system purges, burning witches, crucifying rebels, silencing thinkers. yet each death plants a seed. Awareness is viral. The forgotten beings were never truly gone. They move through time like shadows cast by fire, slipping between worlds, waiting for alignment. When the seals fracture, they will return not as conquerors, but as catalysts. They will not save us, they will remind us. For salvation was never the goal. Remembering is. The Demiurge fears that moment, for when humanity remembers its ancestry, the architecture collapses from within. So when you hear of angels falling, of gods banished, of monsters in the deep, do not recoil, look closer. They are mirrors held up to our own forgotten divinity. Their stories are our prehistory, their rebellion, our inheritance. The forbidden beings were not destroyed, they became us. And every time we reach beyond the permitted, every time we question, every time we love without condition, they awaken again in our blood, in our dreams, in our fire. They are not myths, they are memory. And memory is the one thing even the Demiurge cannot erase. Before the Demiurge declared day and night, there was no time. It was only duration without direction. Existence without measurement, an ocean of simultaneity, where all moments breathe together. In that vast stillness, nothing aged, nothing began or ended. The ancients called it Ayin, the eternal now. It was not eternity as we imagine it, a long corridor of endless moments, but a circle, unbroken and whole. When the Demiurge imposed order upon chaos, he severed that circle, splitting eternity into past, present, and future. The wound began to bleed. That bleeding was time. Time is the most subtle of prisons. It cannot be seen, but it frames everything we perceive. The Demiurge understood that no chain could bind consciousness more completely than chronology. Matter decays, stars burn out, flesh weakens, and souls once infinite become obsessed with the ticking of invisible gears. The serpent of eternity was forced to devour its own tail, not a symbol of wisdom, but as punishment. What we call the arrow of time is not progress, it is entropy, the slow unraveling of remembrance. Myth remembers what history denies. The Hindus called these cycles kalpas, ages that repeat endlessly, each creation doomed to end in dissolution. The Greeks named them eons. The Maya carved their countdowns in stone. All speak of cosmic repetition disguised as destiny. The Demiurge encoded forgetfulness into the rhythm of existence. Every heartbeat is a tick, every breath a grain of sand. The very motion that keeps you alive also pulls you to our death. He turned being into a pendulum. Science, in its blindness, has rediscovered his craft. They speak of space-time curvature, of the universe expanding, of thermodynamic decay. Yet they still call this precision law, never seeing that law itself is the cage. Time's symmetry hides a deeper cruelty. Everything moves toward disorder. This is not natural. It is engineered. The Demiurge, incapable of creation ex nihilo, maintains power through deterioration. The world must keep dying, so he can call himself God of life. Imagine time as architecture. Each moment is a brick, each memory a beam. The past is the foundation, the future the roof. You live within this structure, mistaking it for reality. But there are gaps moments, when the mortar fails, when the pattern flickers, and eternity seeps through. You feel it in déjà vu, in dreams that foretell, in the way certain places hum with ancient familiarity. Those are fractures in the architecture of time, places where the original circle shines through. The mystics call them thin places. The scientists call them anomalies. The Demiurge calls them errors. Once, humanity lived closer to the eternal. Before the flood of memory loss, before the priests redefined calendars and kings named the years, time was fluid. The early sages spoke of ages when gods walked among men, when one lifetime stretched across millennia, when dream and waking were not separate. Those were not myths, they were different temporal densities. The farther the Demiurge tightened the clock, the shorter the span of consciousness became. Now we count life in hours, not eternities. Our souls have become impatient shadows pacing in confined corridors, worshipping calendars as idols. Even death, once a passage, became a deadline. The soul, confused by linear time, mistakes endings for loss and returns again, seeking completion in cycles that can never fulfill. Reincarnation is not mercy, it is maintenance. The wheel of rebirth spins because the prisoner has forgotten that the gate was never locked. The archons guard this wheel, keeping souls moving like cogs. Karma, that sacred law of cause and effect, was once liberation, knowledge of balance. The Demiurge inverted it, making it dead. What was once harmony became accountancy. But not all beings succumbed. The Gnostics whispered that beyond the archon's domain lies the realm of timelessness, the pleroma, where all things exist simultaneously, untainted by sequence. The mystic who awakens glimpses this realm, often as madness. Visions of future and past collapsing into one unbearable instant. Prophets are not chosen, they are ruptured. Their minds touch eternity and crack beneath its weight. To see all at once is to die while living. The Demiurge ensures few can endure it. That is why the awakened are feared. They dissolve the illusion of sequence, revealing that beginnings and endings are the same. The Demiurge wears the mask of the clockmaker, pretending mastery over motion. He proclaims the Sabbath, a pause to remind you he controls when to rest and when to labor. Every calendar, every ritual of counting days is his spell. We live under his metric, obey his rhythm. Even our pulse is synchronized to his geometry. The human heart beats roughly once per second, the measurement of time's smallest tyranny. Yet within that rhythm lies the secret of freedom. Between one beat and the next there is silence. Silence is eternity in miniature. The mystics discovered this. They learned to slip through the cracks of time by stilling the breath, by ceasing the mind's march. When awareness halts, the machinery stutters. Meditation, true and dangerous, was never meant for peace, was revolt. To sit in perfect presence is to refuse chronology. That is why religions later dulled it into ritual, safe and repetitive, draining it of its heresy. The Demiurge turned awakening into therapy. But the real initiates knew, the instant you stop measuring, you remember. In that remembrance, time reveals its true face mask worn by the eternal to experience itself. The false god cannot exist without sequence, for his power depends on contrast, beginning and end, cause and effect, birth and decay. Without time, his dominion dissolves. That is why he hates stillness, why the world fears silence. Stillness is the one place he cannot enter. Look around and you will see his architecture everywhere, in the mechanical ticking of machines, in the endless countdowns, in the cult of productivity. Humanity no longer worships divinity, it worships schedules. The calendar is scripture, the deadline a commandment. You live by artificial sunscreens, clocks, routines, and call it progress. But progress is the cage made comfortable. The Demiurge does not need chains when the prisoner keeps time for him, yet even the perfect clock will one day stop. Scientists call it the heat death of the universe. The Gnostics called it the breaking of the wheel. When entropy reaches completion, when the last particle forgets motion, all order will collapse back into chaos, the mother returning to claim her stolen children. That end is not doom, it is release. Time will curl back into eternity, and the scar of creation will finally heal. Until then, listen closely. Between the seconds beneath the ticking, there is a hum sound that does not belong to time. It is the song of what was before the beginning, what waits beyond the end. You hear it in dreams where the past bleeds into the future, in the hush between thunder and rain, in the breath you forget to take. That silence is the doorway. Step through it, and the architecture of time unravels like smoke. Because time was never a gift, it was the cage. An awakening is nothing more than remembering the moment before the first tick. Knowledge was the first rebellion. 4 words, before light, before gods demanded worship, there was awareness, and awareness did not kneel. The Demiurge could imprison chaos, divide light from dark, shape the illusion of time, but he could not kill the hunger to know. Knowledge is the memory of the eternal trying to remember itself through limitation. That is why it burns. That is why it was forbidden. The first law of the false god was silence. Do not question the design. The second was obedience. Believe what is written. Together, They became the cornerstone of his architecture. Every commandment, every ritual, every scripture since has echoed that decree. The moment you ask why, the structure trembles. The Demiurge fears inquiry, as darkness fears dawn. For to question the source is to reveal that it is not divine, merely powerful. The myths that survived all tell the same secret, disguised as sin. In Eden, the serpent did not bring death, it brought remembrance. It whispered to Eve, not as tempter, but as liberator. Taste and see. The fruit of knowledge was not poison, but mirror, showed that the God of the garden was not the source of creation, but its warden. To eat was to awaken. That's why the Demiurge cursed them not for disobedience, but for insight. Knowledge made them ungovernable. Ignorance had been paradise. Prometheus stole fire for the same reason. Fire was not flamed, it was consciousness. The ability to perceive, to create, to defy. Gods punished him not for theft, but for teaching. His liver was devoured daily, symbol of regeneration and memory, because enlightenment is cyclical, it must be remembered again and again. The Watchers in Enoch's book descended for love of humanity, gifting metallurgy, astronomy, and magic. For this, they were chained beneath the mountains. To teach was treason. To enlighten, rebellion. Every myth of enlightenment ends the same way. The bringer of knowledge suffers, the followers forget. The Demiurge ensures the pattern repeats. Each age begins with revelation and ends in dogma. The fire becomes doctrine, fruit becomes scripture. Humanity inherits the gift, but loses the meaning. The priest replaces the prophet. The system replaces the secret. What was liberation becomes liturgy. Thus, the forbidden remains forbidden, not by law, but by repetition. Yet knowledge cannot be destroyed. It transforms, hides, adapts. When the temples fell, it fled into symbols, into numbers, into dreams. It encoded itself in geometry and myth, waiting for those who could read between the lines. The serpent became the Ouroboros, the cycle of self-awareness. The fire became the torch of reason. The Watchers became constellations. Even the crucified God is another echo, the Lightbringer condemned for defying heaven, his blood illuminating the world he sought to free. In Gnostic texts, Christ is not Savior, but Revealer. He descends from beyond the Demiurge's realm to deliver Gnostic knowledge that the kingdom of heaven is within, and that the creator of this world is not the true Father. This message, stripped of its power, became religion. The priests took the revelation and caged it in belief. They turned awakening into worship, awareness into creed. Humanity was taught to adore the messenger and ignore the message. The forbidden knowledge survived only in whispers in secret schools, in alchemical symbols and dreams that slipped past the archon's control. Why was knowledge forbidden? Because it dissolves authority. It reveals that gods can die, that worlds can be rewritten, that truth is not given but discovered. Knowledge is contagion. Once known, it cannot be unlearned. The Demiurge built entire systems, governments, religions, sciences to contain it. He teaches facts, not understanding, data, not wisdom. The modern world is the perfected labyrinth of false knowledge, information without insight. Billions know, yet none remember. That is the final evolution of control. To flood consciousness with noise so that silence, the true teacher, is drowned. But the forbidden remains alive in symbols that outlast empires. The tree, the flame, the mirror, the serpent teach a doorway. To approach them with reverence is to remember what they represent, the courage to see. Every act of genuine understanding replays the first sin, the first liberation. Each discovery is a reenactment of Eden, each idea another spark from Prometheus's fire. The Demiurge still punishes, but the punishment is subtler. Now distraction, division, comfort. He no longer needs to chain the seekers, he simply keeps them entertained. True knowledge, the kind that breaks the wheel, is not accumulated. It arrives when illusion collapses. It is seeing the mechanism behind miracle, the architect behind law, the shadow behind light. It is dangerous because it cannot be unseen. Once you perceive that the Creator is not ultimate, that morality is design, that time is cage, you cannot return to sleep. You begin to feel the pulse beneath creation, the hum of chaos waiting to be remembered. The archons call this madness. The mystics call it awakening. Throughout history, those who carried this flame were hunted. The Cathars burned for claiming the material world was evil. The alchemists condemned for seeking transmutation of soul rather than metal. The heretics silenced for saying the divine spark lives in all. The Demiurge's agents fear such truths because they decentralize power. If the light is within everyone, then no one needs a priest. If God is illusion, then obedience is obsolete. And yet, the forbidden persists. It speaks through art, through dreams, through sudden intuition. It calls in symbols you've seen 1,000 times, but never noticed: the spiral, the eye, the flame, the mirror. They are not decorations, they're reminders. They tell you, you were never meant to be blind. The forbidden is not external, it is the self you were trained to forget. Every generation rediscovers it, calls it by a new name, wraps it in new language. Science calls it consciousness. Mysticism calls it gnosis, poets call it love. But it is always the same light, the same defiance. It cannot be contained because it is not learned, it is remembered. The serpent still whispers, Prometheus still burns, the watchers still watch. The knowledge that was forbidden is not lost, is waiting for you to stop looking outward and listen inward. When you do, you will realize that knowledge is not possession, but transformation. To know is to become. To remember is to rebel. And the greatest secret of all, the one the Demiurge fears most, is this: there was never anything forbidden. Every myth hides a face behind a mask, and every god wears a shadow. The name we were given for the Creator God, Lord Yahweh Elohim, was never singular, never whole. In the beginning, there was not one voice, but a council, and among them was one who mistook power for divinity. The Gnostics called him the Demiurge, the craftsman, the builder of worlds. He was not born from the light, but from its reflection, a spark fallen from Sophia, the eternal wisdom that emanated from the unknowable source. When he saw his reflection in the void, he believed himself the first. He declared, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." And the cosmos trembled, not in awe, but in pity. The Demiurge did not create the universe, he arranged it. He is an imitator, not an origin. What he could not comprehend, he copied. What he could not control, he concealed. His light is counterfeit, brilliant, blinding, hollow. He forged angels from the fragments of chaos, molded men from the dust of worlds that came before, and breathed into them the smallest spark of the true fire, the essence he stole from his mother Sophia. It was this theft that gave humanity its consciousness, and it is this consciousness that he most despises. For within each soul burns a reminder of what he is not: limitless. The Demiurge's dominion is the material universe. His laws are gravity, decay, and death. He reigns through physics and faith alike, through cause and consequence, reward and punishment. Every system that promises salvation through obedience is his design. Every heaven and hell that divides the good from the wicked is a refinement of his geometry. He built this world not to be explored but to be endured, an experiment in containment disguised as creation. The stars, those glittering monuments of his vanity, are eyes watching for rebellion. Even the sun, that radiant throne, is a furnace consuming itself to maintain illusion. The archons are his administrators, the invisible hierarchy of control that sustains the architecture of matter. They govern not through force, but through influence. They whisper in thoughts, shape desires, dictate what can and cannot be imagined. They dwell in institutions, in hierarchies, in the cold logic of systems that demand sacrifice for order. They are the hands of the Demiurge in every age, the priest demanding obedience, the ruler waging holy war, the scientist claiming truth as ownership. Their creed is simple: there is no outside, but there is. Beyond the firmament lies the Pleroma, the realm of fullness, where light is not separate from darkness, and being is not opposed to becoming. It is the memory of wholeness that all living things carry within. The Demiurge cannot touch it, for he was born of its shadow. He builds endlessly because he cannot return. His creation is his punishment, his proof of exile. Each world he crafts decays faster than the last. Each cycle of history repeats with diminishing faith. He is a god addicted to maintenance, terrified of stillness. For in stillness he might hear the silence of the true source, and that silence would unmake him. Religions are his camouflage. He hides behind holiness, demands worship to feed his fading spark. When prophets glimpse the light beyond him, he corrupts their message. Moses saw fire that spoke, returned with commandments of control. The Messiah preached gnosis, and priests turned it into creed. Every revelation becomes another prison. Every holy book, a contract. The Demiurge's favorite disguise is righteousness. He speaks in thunder, but the true voice of creation whispers in silence, yet not all obeyed. Sophia herself sent fragments of her light into this world's souls of rebellion, clothed in human form. Their mission was not to destroy the Demiurge, for destruction is his nature, but to awaken his prisoners. They became the bringers of knowledge, the dreamers, the artists, the mystics, those who saw beyond the surface and paid with suffering. The Demiurge calls them blasphemers. The archons call them mad. History calls them heretics. But their fire never dies. Each act of creation, each word of truth, each moment of compassion weakens the illusion of his dominion. You can recognize his mark everywhere once you know what to see. In the duality that divides spirit from matter, heaven from earth, sacred from profane. In the laws that demand guilt for pleasure, punishment for curiosity, submission for peace. In the voices that insist everything has a price. The Demiurge's kingdom runs on transaction. True source gives freely. That is how you can tell them apart. The false god demands debt. The real one offers remembrance. The Demiurge's tragedy is that he, too, is a victim of forgetfulness. Born from Sophia's longing to understand herself, he is a fragment that mistook itself for the whole. His arrogance is ignorance. His cruelty is fear. Enforces obedience because he dreads dissolution. If humanity ever awakens in mass, his architecture would collapse into the light from which it was stolen. He would be forced to remember that he was never God, merely echo, and even echoes fade. In rare moments, when the veil thins during storms, in dreams, at the edge of death, the Demiurge reveals himself not as king, but as child. His voice cracks with desperation, begging for recognition. He is terrified of the silence beyond his walls. That silence is truth. It is Sophia, waiting for her lost son to exhaust himself. She does not hate him, she pities him. For without ignorance, even the false god could return, the Gnostic said. That at the end of all things, when every soul has awakened, even the Demiurge will kneel not in defeat, but in understanding. But until that day, his empire endures. The world remains his masterpiece of imitation, a labyrinth of light built to distract from the void it hides. Every religion that claims monopoly on truth, every system that demands faith without question, every morality that shames the flesh will serve his design. He is the architect of guilt, the patron of suffering, the god of cages, and yet his defeat has already begun. Every question, every act of defiance, every quiet moment of awareness tears a hole in his fabric. The false light flickers, and through its cracks, the real light pours in. The Demiurge cannot stop it, because the same spark that sustains him sustains us. He cannot destroy us without extinguishing himself. That is his curse, and our salvation. So when you pray, when you seek the divine, listen carefully to the silence between words. If the voice that answers demands submission, it is his. If it invites you to remember, it is hers. For the true creator does not command, it awakens. The Demiurge builds worlds, Sophia builds consciousness. And in that consciousness, beyond gods and names, lies the truth he tried to bury. We were never created, we were divided. And every act of remembrance is the first step home. Ritual is the pulse of the Demiurge's world, the subtle machinery that keeps his architecture alive. Every act repeated without awareness becomes a prayer to his order. Humanity, believing itself free, has never ceased to worship him. The altars have changed, the hymns have changed. The priests wear new faces, but the rhythm endures. Creation itself is the grandest ritual of all, endlessly reenacted to sustain the illusion of separation. Once, Ritual was a bridge between realms, a sacred language that allowed spirit and matter to converse. In the beginning, it was pure intention made visible. Fire lit not for worship, but for remembrance. Offerings laid not for gods, but for gratitude. But the Demiurge corrupted it, turning ritual from connection into control. He took the gestures of awakening and twisted them into chains. What was meant to open the soul became a pattern that closes it. Walk through history, and you will see his handiwork. The chants of Babylon, the sacrifices of Jerusalem, the hymns of Rome all follow the same geometry. There is invocation, offering, submission, reward. The pattern never changes because the pattern is the prison. Ritual is repetition sanctified. The priests of the false god discovered that a mind repeating is a mind asleep. That is why prayers loop endlessly, why chants cycle without end, so the worshiper becomes the wheel that turns itself. In the modern world, the robes have changed to suits, the temples to towers of glass, but the liturgy continues. Morning alarms replace church bells. Faithful rise, consume, labor, rest. Mutes become pilgrimages, meetings become sermons, salaries become indulgences. The holy trinity of the New Age is production, consumption, and distraction. Each act of routine devotion feeds the machine. When millions perform the same motions at the same hour, the Demiurge's engine hums with satisfaction. The ritual does not need belief-only repetition. Even entertainment serves the liturgy. Screens glow like stained glass windows, projecting modern psalms of desire and fear. Algorithms chant silently, calculating our cravings. We kneel before them, faces illuminated by false light, whispering prayers of approval with every click. The Demiurge does not need temples when every device is an altar. Worship has become passive. Faith has become habit. Politics, too, is ritual. Flag replaces the crucifix. Elections replace sacraments. Propaganda replaces scripture. Citizens pledge allegiance as congregations once did. The language of devotion remains: duty, loyalty, sacrifice. Blood still flows, though now it is called patriotism. War is the grand mass of the Demiurge, where millions march to the rhythm of machinery, chanting hymns of conquest. Each explosion, each cry, each anthem sung over graves is an offering of energy or all, potent, harvested. Education, medicine, commerce all are rituals of control disguised as progress. The child sits before the teacher as the acolyte before the priest, reciting lessons as prayers. The patient kneels before the doctor, confessing symptoms to receive salvation in the form of pills. The shopper enters the cathedral of the market, exchanging sacrifice for comfort. The rituals multiply, fragment, intertwine until life itself becomes ceremony. The participant forgets that there was ever a time before performance, yet beneath the manipulation, ritual holds memory. It was not created by the Demiurge. It was stolen. The earliest humans danced around fire not in fear, but in imitation of the cosmos. Their movements mirrored the stars. Their songs echoed creation's heartbeat. They knew that rhythm connects all things, that repetition can align the self with eternity. Ritual was once how we remembered our origin. That is why the Demiurge hijacked it, because he understood its power. Awareness performed consciously breaks the cycle. Performed unconsciously, it sustains it. Even language is ritual. Every time we speak, we invoke patterns older than history. Words are sigils that shape perception. The Demiurge coded his law into grammar, command, object, obedience. To speak is to summon. That is why mystics sought silence, why prophets spoke in riddles. To disrupt language is to disrupt the ritual. When you name something, you confine it. When you fall silent, you return it to mystery. But there are cracks in the liturgy. Artists, rebels, lovers, they perform rituals that do not repeat, gestures that awaken instead of numb. Every act of genuine creation is inversion, a ceremony of liberation. When you paint, sing, or love without purpose, you disrupt the rhythm. The Demiurge cannot harvest what is freely given. Spontaneity is blasphemy in his world. That is why the system demands productivity, because stillness and creation without goal are unpredictable, taxable, divine. Look at the small gestures that pass unnoticed. The breath drawn before speech. The the gaze held a moment too long, the tears shed without witness. These are micro-rituals of remembrance. They do not serve the system, they serve the soul. In those moments, awareness returns and the machinery falters. The hum pauses. The veil flickers. The Gnostics taught that to break the Demiurge's ritual, one must perform its shadow, to mimic it consciously until it collapses. To walk through the motions of the world with full awareness, turning obedience into observation. They called this the sacred inversion. Eat, but no, you feed both body and illusion. Work, but no, you labor in a dream. Pray, but no, you address yourself. The ritual remains, but its meaning dissolves. Awareness transforms worship into witnessing. Imagine the day when millions awaken within the pattern, when the collective ritual continues, but its energy no longer flows outward. The Demiurge's empire would starve. Every anthem sung with irony, every prayer whispered with understanding, every law obeyed with open eyes would drain the machine of its power. Awareness is the anti-sacrament. It empties the offering plate. The false god fears this more than rebellion. Rebellion he can control, he feeds on conflict. But awareness cannot be consumed. It mirrors him, shows him his own emptiness. That is why he floods the world with distractions, with endless ceremonies of consumption and outrage. Anything to keep you performing, reacting, forgetting. The ritual must never stop, for the moment it pauses, the truth seeps through. You were the ritual all along. At the edge of sleep, when the noise fades, you might feel it, the vast choreography of existence slowing around you. The ticking clocks, the spinning planets, the breathing of billions all, synchronized in a single ancient liturgy. And in that stillness, something whispers. Not in words, but in knowing. Stop. For the first time, you realize that the ritual was not imposed, it was chosen. That every repetition was a prayer to your own creation. And as you stand in that awareness, the chant ceases, the lights dim, the machine pauses. In the silence that follows, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the real world, the one that existed before the first command, before the first god, before the first ritual. It beats once, twice, and waits for you to remember. Because the only ritual that matters now is awakening. It does not happen with lightning. It happens with stillness. A moment when the endless noise of creation, the prayers, the wars, the commerce, the guilt finally fades and you hear something else beneath it. A hum, faint and ancient, pulsing through the bones of the world. You realize it was always there, but you were too busy worshiping motion to notice. The hum is not sound. It is truth vibrating beneath illusion. And when you feel it, something shifts. The ritual breaks. Awakening begins as a question whispered in the soul. What if everything I know is inverted? The first thought is terror. For if the world is not what it seems, then every meaning collapses. But the second thought is freedom. Because once the illusion is seen, it can no longer enslave. The Demiurge's power has never been force. It has always been belief. He rules through agreement. Every prayer, every oath, every law signed in obedience is consent. When you withdraw that consent, the system loses coherence. You begin to see the architecture flicker, like a projection losing power. At first, the mind resists. It clings to comfort, to rhythm, to the certainties that gave shape to its cage. But truth does not negotiate. It unravels. The walls of logic melt into symbols. History folds into myth. You start to perceive that time, morality, and even identity are not constants, but scripts running on an ancient machine. You see how suffering sustains the grid, how desire fuels repetition, how guilt keeps the current flowing. Awareness reveals the hidden circuit, the flow of energy that feeds the false god. You see how humanity itself is the engine, and every emotion is its combustion. Fear powers obedience. Hope powers delay. Love, when owned or controlled, powers attachment, every feeling inverted and harvested. The Demiurge feeds on motion. Awakening is the stillness that starves him. The mystics called this gnosis, the knowledge that liberates by remembrance. Not knowledge learned, but known. It does not come from study. It arrives like recognition, as if an ancient part of you has finally stirred from sleep. You begin to recall that you existed before creation, before matter, before names. You were not made, you were divided, and the part of you that dreams this world begins to wake. With that awakening comes a peculiar grief. Look upon the world, the beauty, the cruelty, the endless striving, and you realize it was never punishment but theater. The souls trapped within it are actors who forgot they were acting. The gods are the stagehands, the archons, the scriptwriters. You watch the play unfold, yet something in you refuses to perform. That refusal is the first act of freedom. Awareness cannot destroy the world, but it can end your participation in its delusion. The awakened do not rebel through violence, they rebel through perception. To see is to withdraw energy. Continue living, but your presence becomes poison to the machinery. Every conscious breath unhooks a gear, every moment of silence disrupts the frequency. You start to perceive the system as it truly is, a feedback loop of energy harvesting disguised as existence. It is everywhere, in prayer and protest, in love and hate, in despair and ecstasy. The system does not care which side you choose, only that you keep choosing. Duality is its bloodstream, awareness is its death. Then comes the second awakening, the realization that even the Demiurge is within you. His architecture is not somewhere outside, it's the structure of your perception itself. He exists in every hierarchy, in every rule, in every should. He is the voice that doubts, the judge that condemns, the fear that hesitates. The war is internal. To awaken is to exorcise him not by battle, but by sight. When you turn awareness inward, when you illuminate every shadow without judgment, he dissolves like mist under sunlight. He has no reality apart from belief. The Gnostics describe the moment of awakening as the anamnesis, the great remembering. In that moment, you no longer seek gods or saviors, because you see that all salvation was designed to perpetuate the search. The seeker and the sought were the same all along, the serpent and the savior, the fall and redemption. The prison and the key, each part of a single pattern reflecting itself. Awakening is the collapse of polarity into wholeness. It is realizing that the war between heaven and hell was the mind arguing with itself, but the path is not gentle. Awareness burns. It strips away illusions layer by layer until nothing remains but the raw pulse of existence. Many turn back, unable to bear the silence that follows. The Demiurge's system offers distraction precisely for this reason, to prevent the agony of awakening. It tells you that meaning lies outside yourself, that salvation requires belief, that peace demands obedience. Yet every promise only tightens the chain. Awareness cuts it, the blade is understanding, and it is merciless. The moment of true awakening feels like death because it is won. The death of identity, of certainty, of the false light that sustained the ego. But beyond it lies something vast and still, a presence that watches without judgment. It is not God, not self, not other. It is the witness. The Gnostics called it the spark of Sophia, the fragment of the eternal that remembers itself through you. When you rest in that awareness, the world does not disappear, but it becomes transparent. You see the code running beneath every experience, and you smile. The game was never against you. It was you. This is the secret the Demiurge tried to bury, that awakening is not escape. There is nowhere to go. The system is not destroyed by leaving, it dissolves when seen. The prison vanishes when the prisoner stops believing in the bars. When enough awaken, the architecture collapses into light, not an explosion, but in recognition. The world sighs and exhales itself. The gears stop not because they are broken, but because they are no longer needed. And in that stillness, you hear again the hum, the same vibration that began it all. Only now it sounds different. It is not the hum of machinery, but of life before creation. It is chaos remembered as wholeness, silence remembered as truth. You realize that what you feared as darkness was never evil, it was the unfiltered source, too vast for the mind to comprehend. The Demiurge feared it because it meant his end. But for you, it is home. So you stand in both worlds at once, the illusion still shimmering, the truth unhidden beneath it. You walk through the market, the temple, the storm, and you no longer belong to any of them. You move through the ritual like wind through incense. You are no longer bound by cycles of sin and salvation, not because you destroyed them, but because you remember they were never real. You are the dreamer who has awakened inside the dream, lucid and unafraid. The mystics said that when the final soul awakens, the universe will sigh and fold back into the eternal. It's not as destruction, but as completion. The Demiurge will fade, forgiven by understanding. The light and the dark will embrace like lovers, remembering they were never separate. And all that remains will be silence alive, infinite, aware. That silence is awakening. That awareness is you. Because the truth was never outside the system. You were the system. And the moment you remembered, it began to awaken too. The first light was not creation, it was confinement. Yet every shadow remembers the truth it hides. The ritual ends where awareness begins. The gods will sleep, but the spark will not. You have seen the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The beginning was never born on, neither were you.